Back in 1865, South America just exploded into one of its deadliest conflicts ever, the War of the Triple Alliance. It was this shockingly brutal war that seemed to come out of absolutely nowhere. But, wars don't just happen. They're never spontaneous. So let's take a look at the tinderbox, all the internal pressures and the external provocations that were about to set an entire continent on fire. At the very heart of this whole thing is one man, the Paraguayan dictator Francisco Solano Lopez. To really get how this war started, we first have to understand the kind of absolute power this guy had. I mean, how do you convince or maybe compel an entire country to follow you into a fight against three of its neighbors all at once? So let's start by taking a look inside Paraguay right around early 1865. Because you see, before Lopez could even think about projecting power outward, he first had to build this unshakable fortress of control at home. He had to tear down any and all opposition until every single lever of the state answered to him and only him. And believe me, his control was total. Financially, he basically owned the nation's wealth. The state ran the railroads, the arsenals, everything. He even controlled dissent through the church. There was a bishop who reportedly used the sacrament of confession as a way to spy on people for him. Can you imagine? And politically, well, the Congress was just for show. It was there to rubber stamp whatever he wanted, including, crucially, the power to declare war all on his own. This wasn't subtle either. When the Congress named him Field Marshal in March of 1865, they also voted him a new annual salary, 60,000 duros. Now, to put that into perspective for you, his own father, who was the leader before him, only got 4,000. The message couldn't have been clearer. Lopez's personal fortune and the state's fortune were now the exact same thing. But this wasn't just about money. No, his power was built on something much, much darker: pure terror. When some Paraguayans living in Buenos Aires dared to protest his regime, Lopez went after their families back home. This quote you're seeing, it's from a letter he forced a mother to publish in a state newspaper, publicly disowning her own son for supposed treason. That was the climate of fear he created. It made sure no one inside Paraguay would ever dare to question him. Okay, so he's got his own country locked down tight with fear. Now Lopez starts to look outward. But the landscape he's looking at is anything but peaceful. The whole region was already a tinderbox of old rivalries and simmering tensions, especially with the giants next door, Brazil and Argentina. From Brazil's perspective, they'd been putting up with provocations for years. A diplomatic memo from early 1865 laid out their entire case, just detailing this long history of broken treaties about river navigation, which was a huge deal, a literal lifeline for Brazil's remote Mato Grosso province. The final straw, though, came in 1864 when Paraguay captured a civilian mail ship, the Marquês de Olinda. Brazil saw that as a completely outrageous violation of international law. Now, the relationship with Argentina was just as bad, but it was fought in the newspapers. So on one hand, you have Paraguay seeing itself as this modernizing nation, this key defender of the whole region's balance of power. But on the other hand, the papers in Buenos Aires were just relentless. They mocked Lopez, calling him a cacique, a tribal chieftain, and they dismissed his capital, Asunción, as a toldería, basically a bunch of primitive huts. And these insults, they got under Lopez's skin and really fueled his anger. So let's recap, right? You've got a dictator with absolute power, simmering regional tensions, and a steady drumbeat of insults. In the spring of 1865, all these volatile ingredients finally mixed together, and it pushed the entire region right past the point of no return. Now, before we get to the final act, there's a term that's really important to understand: casus belli. It's basically the justification for war, that one final incident that makes a conflict seem unavoidable. And for Argentina, that moment was about to arrive, and in a very dramatic way. And folks, this was it. This was the moment. Lopez, who was already gearing up to attack Brazil, makes this absolutely stunning demand. He asks for permission to march his army straight across Argentine territory. Argentine's president, Bartolomé Mitre, says no, flat out, citing his country's neutrality. But to Lopez, that wasn't neutrality. He saw it as a hostile act. And so his puppet Congress immediately authorized him to declare war on Argentina. The official declaration of the war was actually written down on March 29th, but Lopez didn't bother to have it delivered. Nope. Instead, he decided to let his actions do the talking. So on the morning of April 13th, the war began, not with a diplomat's note, but with the roar of cannons. And nobody saw it coming. The Paraguayan ships just sailed right past the port, almost waving as they went, lulling the Argentines into a false sense of security.
And then they turned back. They opened fire, boarded 2 unsuspecting Argentine naval ships, and just towed them away. Anyone who resisted was either killed or captured. It was treacherous, and it was an undeniable act of war.
So when the news of this surprise attack finally reached Buenos Aires, the city just exploded with rage. I mean, the insults in the press were one thing, but an unprovoked military attack? That was something else entirely. Almost overnight, all that talk of neutrality just vanished. President Mitre got up in front of this massive, furious crowd and made this fiery promise. You can just feel the energy, right? The confidence. 3 months and we'll be in Ascension. Of course, as history would show, that was a truly disastrous miscalculation of the war that was about to unfold. So now Argentina is all in, and things start moving fast. Lopez's big gamble had completely backfired, and his list of enemies was about to get a whole lot longer. Less than 3 weeks after the attack, the nations that were against him got together to make their pact official.
On May 1st in Buenos Aires, representatives from the Brazilian Empire, the Argentine Republic, and Uruguay, which was called the Banda Oriental back then, signed a secret treaty. This was the birth of the Triple Alliance. And they had one single, solitary goal: the downfall of Francisco Solano Lopez. They were now united against a common enemy.
So there you have it. The stage was set, an alliance was forged in righteous anger, and its leaders promised a victory that would be swift and decisive. But wars, they rarely followed the script. The conflict that was supposed to be over and done within 3 months would drag on for 5 brutal years, becoming one of the most catastrophic wars in modern history. It really makes you wonder, what happens when a 3-month war lasts for 5 years? What's the true cost of underestimating your enemy?